to all of you who are willing to have your videos on. My name is Melissa Shackelford, and I serve as the program director of program curation here at Upper House. You're welcome to have your video on today, but you're also welcome to keep it off. We are recording this conversation to save, and it will be accessible on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you would like to have your video on, you are agreeing to be recorded with our program. So if you do not want to be a part of that, you're welcome to keep it off. I do recommend, because of the panel nature of our conversations today, that if you want to enter speaker view here in Zoom, you can do that at the top right-hand corner. You can select that view if that is more conducive to your listening. And then if you have any questions for the panelists as we go, this is quite a transparent group because we can see each other, which is great. So if you have something you want to chime in, just put that into the chat. We might be able to catch that as we go, but we also might be able to capture that at the end of our hour today. So for those who might not be as familiar with Upper House, we are a center for Christian gathering and learning. And we welcome all who long to explore the life of the mind and the questions of the soul. Today's conversation reflects the convergence of two content themes that we care deeply about at Upper House: leadership and justice. We want to equip people in all fields and vocations to be exemplary leaders who critically engage with systemic and cultural realities that shape individuals and communities so that we all may flourish. This is Creating Just Workplaces Part 2, and it's in partnership with Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. And so thank you all for sharing this event in your network today as well. As some of you know, we started this conversation earlier this month, but were unfortunately cut short due to technical difficulties. So welcome back to those of you who are here with us, who were here with us for Part 1. And thank you to our panelists for creating more time to continue the conversation today. Without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. First of all, let me welcome Anthony Cooper Sr., who is the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Reentry Services for Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. He is a devoted husband and father of 2 sons and dedicates his time to ensure that men leaving prison are reacclimated to society. Anthony brings 10 years of job development and mentoring experience to this role. He has served as a placement specialist, corporate recruiter, fatherhood program facilitator at the Urban League of Greater Madison, and as owner and director of Opportunity Tree Incorporated. In his current role, Anthony is responsible for networking with employers, partnering with community development or community organizations and the Department of Corrections, mentoring and establishing mentor relationships, and also operating the Nehemiah House and Dignity House. Anthony has a strong passion for changing the view of incarcerated individuals in society so they no longer feel imprisoned when released. Anthony, thank you for joining us today.
For having me.
Next, I'd like to welcome Christine Jeske in South Africa. She earned her PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and has worked in microfinance, refugee resettlement, community development, and teaching while living in Nicaragua, China, and South Africa. She lives in an old Wisconsin farmhouse named Sanctuary, complete with 12 chickens, several pigs, innumerable weeds, 2 children, and 1 wonderful husband. Welcome, Christine. Next, I'd like to welcome Vanessa McDowell, who is the CEO of the YWCA here in Madison, Wisconsin, the first Black woman to hold that position in the YWCA Madison's 108-year history. She was appointed by Governor Evers to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council in 2019 and was named one of the 35 most influential African Americans in Wisconsin by Madison 365 in 2018. Vanessa works to leverage voices that have been silenced and to empower others to live out their purpose. She brings to her work an empowerment model that aligns with the YWCA's mission to eliminate racism and empower women. Prior to joining the YWCA, Vanessa worked for UW-Madison's Equity and Inclusion Laboratory and was the executive assistant to the pastor for Mount Zion Baptist Church. Vanessa, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So as I mentioned, we are picking up mid-conversation, and we talked about a lot of things in the 30 minutes we got in part one. So I just kind of want to prime us and remind us where we're coming from. And if people want to watch that part one of the conversation, you can access that on our YouTube channel, and Lindsay will post that in the chat for us. But each of you reflected on how your role interfaces with creating just workplaces. And we also talked about some key guiding principles that are important for creating just workplaces. We talked about, Vanessa, you mentioned moving beyond diversity and inclusion conversation to a sense of belonging and asking, do I feel like I belong? And can you show up in your workplace, not being someone else, but showing up as who you actually are? Anthony, you talked about, is what we're speaking about in public actually being practiced in our office? The difference between, we talked a lot about just the behavioral representation and the cultural embodiment. And you also highlighted the importance of being a reflection of the community that you serve. Christine, you highlighted the importance of respect and the role that respect plays in the significance of the workplace and having a meaningful job, and the role of appreciation. And then we also asked the question, how do you know if your workplace is just? Vanessa, you offered a couple of questions. Is it welcoming? And if you have an open door policy, is it being used? How do you receive feedback? How do you deal with conflict? All of these things where we dove into in a variety of ways. And pardon my notes here. Anthony, you talked about the importance of hiring people that are different than you and not being afraid to challenge others and be challenged, and to have those candid conversations. So we talked about the importance of navigating conflict well. Let me see here. Also, the importance of what you're doing in your organization has to line up with what you're doing in the community. And Christine, you also highlighted the role that, the path that you took in your research, and the importance of seeking out people who were not in a white middle class academic area to read your work and to vet your work. And you asked us a great reflective question: do I only make friends with people who I have the most in common in my workplace, or am I developing a network across the organization of people who are different than me? How do we be good co-workers? So that's where we left off. And we're gonna, is there anything I'm missing? Maybe let me just start with that, or a sentiment from any of the panelists as we dive back in today.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you take wonderful notes.
She covered it. I was going to say, I think she covered it.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Okay, I know that was a lot, but people can re-listen to that. But I want to get into some of the nuts and bolts of what this looks like. And I think one of the areas is best practices for hiring. What does it look like? How do we bring equity to the entry points of work? What are the things we need to be thinking about if we're in one of those positions of hiring and recruiting? And each of you is bringing different experiences to that question. So I'd love just to open that up. Maybe Anthony, I'll tag you to reflect with us first.
Oh, well, sure, not a problem.
Okay.
I think I was like, oh, Vanessa's gonna go first. Go, yeah. But okay, I can take notes, right? So
you can pass the ball if you want, but
I think one of the and I'm kind of making it short and sweet as far as being able to allow your agency or company to know that I'll talk since we're all community here, right? So you have to be okay with being able to allow the village to change, right? And know it's going to continue to evolve to different things. It's going to continue to grow, and it's going to look different each time as you grow. And also, I feel that because of that, as you're bringing in more talent and bringing in, I like to say, raw talent, because now you're trying to mold what you already have to what they've already accomplished, and being able to really bringing them to the table, no matter. And honestly, I even feel you bring the janitor to the table as well. as much as you would bring your vice president to the table, because there's things that that person can actually add, because they're looking at things differently throughout the agency, and they may see things that which you don't necessarily always see. So I'll look at that.
Good.
Yeah, I would just add one of the things I think we kind of got into in the last conversation was dispelling the myth that people of color aren't out there. And so what a lot of times is people will stop at in terms of the hiring process. They'll say, well, we put it on our website. Like they didn't apply. And what, I say to that is, yeah, you got to do a little more work. The color are going to find this information, right? So there are numerous opportunities where we have all these things that are in different communities that can be utilized to publicize opportunities, right? And so sometimes we don't go far enough, I would say, to reach out to communities of color to really get the word out there about these opportunities. And then the other thing I would say is in regards to hiring practices is making sure you go, we've developed a long time ago, sort of like a racial equity tool. And it's an opportunity for organizations to kind of go through these different steps and think through different questions about what barriers are you putting up as an organization that are preventing a group of people from not being able to access this opportunity. So you may have, for instance, let's say a job, right? You have a position description, and when you look at the qualifications, if you really look at the qualifications, you have to ask yourself, do you really have to have a master's degree level? And it's like, probably not to do this job, right? So actually going through different job descriptions and saying, are all the things in here really necessary? Because if not, then you need to get to an interview because they don't have that particular thing, but they may have a wealth of experience, but you're missing out on a great person because you have that one requirement that knocks out a group of people.
That's good.
Those
Christine.
are so great. Yeah. I would repeat everything you all just said too. One thing I'm thinking about adding to is the need for transparency. Vanessa, I love what you just said about going through your job description and thinking, what are some things that maybe aren't essential that somebody is going to assume like they'll, just not apply for it because they don't realize that it might not be essential for you, but also transparency. I just had my students do this activity where they have to go through a long process of investigating what it would be like to live at a minimum wage job in the community where our college is. And they have to look up a couple of hypothetical jobs. And one thing that we notice is that over and over again, when students do this activity, they actually come up with the job at Aldi. And I asked them one time, I was like, why does everybody seem to choose a job at Aldi? And they said, well, it's because it's the only job we can find that has all the information on the website that we need to even fulfill this assignment. And that the bar is pretty low. It's just like, how many hours a week are you going to work? What are the qualifications? Are there benefits? And a lot of job postings don't even have that basic information. So the more you can be transparent, and this goes for hiring and wage negotiations also, if you can put out and have public clear information on what the salary is going to look like, that helps prevent discrepancies in like gender bias and wages and salaries over time too. So transparency is a good principle to aim for.
That's great. So once we're inside the context of an organization, Vanessa, actually, I'm thinking, this is a statement I've actually heard you say before when you did an interview here at Upper House, just about leadership in the community. And you said leaders set the tone. And so I'd like to unpack that in the context of creating a just workplace. And what does it require from the leader, which could be at a variety of different levels, but however you guys want to take that conversation, what does it require to shift the tone of a workplace to be more just? Leaders set the tone. What does that look like?
I can start. I think, for me, when I say that, I mean that, I really believe that leadership defines a lot of what you see in an organization. That's why it's so important who the leader is, right? That's why it's so important that you have the right person that's leading. And I think, I utilize this principle when sort of training other leaders or training my supervisors who are in leadership roles, or training my change team who provide sort of some leadership responsibilities in the organization, to be able to help them to see, like, one, that you are role modeling something, right? People are looking to you to see how you respond, right? So one of the things that I, am often, I guess, known for is I'm pretty calm for the most part. So like, and a lot of, the work that we do is a lot of crisis. People are coming to us in crisis. And so what they a lot of times are looking for is that calm, someone that they can come to that is going to be calm, that going to say, okay, we're going to get through this. When the pandemic hit, as you can imagine, it was crisis. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Everybody's not knowing information. What's happening? And I literally had to take, as a leader, I was like very conscious of, okay, Vanessa, you have to be calm through this so that your staff can also take a moment of breath, right? And that knowing that we're going to get through this together. And so it really, to me, helped us as an organization. I saw how, the folks that we work with, how they sort of took on my character a little bit. So like, even though it was chaotic and going through a pandemic and there's a lot of unknowns, we were still able to get through it because of the leadership tone, I think, that I set around, we're going to get through it, and we're going to get through it together. And we're going to get through it with the values that we established together of humanity, community, growth, and restoration. And when we set these 4 values at the time, we didn't know we would be utilizing them in such a way this year. However, they have been our guiding sort of principles through this time. And so I just think that leadership is hugely important in setting the tone for an organization.
Thank you. Anthony or Christine, do you want to build on that in a particular direction?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how leadership is also so key in building diversity in an organization. We talk about not having tokens. So thinking about that last question of how to increase the diversity of your hiring. If somebody's coming into a position, they look around the room at who's interviewing them and they don't see anybody that in some way has an experience that it feels similar to what their experience is coming in, it's hard to even want that job, right? So thinking about increasing the diversity of an organization, start at the top and think about who's in leadership. And some of the ways to do that, I think a principle that I saw over and over again in my research that people talked about appreciating about the organizations they loved was that organizations were willing to take risks in how they advocated for people and brought them into new experiences. So not just thinking we're only going to promote the person who meets this criteria already, but leadership is something that everybody learns, and you learn it by being given trust and being welcomed into settings. There was one organization I did research with that the employees were more satisfied with it than any other place. It was a shoe factory. And so a lot of the employees came in, thinking of themselves as sort of low experience, like I'm just here training you how to use a machine. But they did this thing where they had leadership meetings every week, and there was a rotating basis where every single employee of the organization got to come into those top level meetings at the company. And so it's building this sense of ownership, but it's also building skills, like you get to see how an institution works. So that's one thought is don't just sort of assume that people already have the leadership skills, but welcome them into challenging leadership roles.
That's good.
Excuse me. Yeah. So, I love what the both of them has said, Vanessa and Christine. As far as I think, really, it is basically leading from the top down and being able to trust the people who you have as leaders, right? Being able to let them know that you have value in them. My team that we talk about just about everything, but I think at the end of the day, when the fact that they know that I trust them and they know that I take what they say in high regard and will move and really put action behind it. That, I mean, to me, and I don't care if they call me at 2 a.m. And then that also, it really just shows them, because when they have a thought, we're sharing those thoughts together. So it's not the fact of me just leading them, it's the fact that we're working together as a unit, we're working together as a team for the common good. And that's what we continue to do. And I think that by just doing that, that changes the whole morale of everyone that they come in contact with. Because they're like, hey, it's not just, all right, let me fix this for you. We will try to figure out a way to be able to build what we need to make sure that our team grows. So that changes the whole dynamic in my eyes.
And I would just add too, I was going to say, one of the things I was thinking about in terms of leadership that we don't talk about sometimes is leadership also is knowing when it's time to move on. There are opportunities sometimes where you have maybe done all that you are assigned to do in that role. And sometimes people stay too long in a role. And then, as you know, it kind of gets stale, right? And we've all had those or seen those opportunities where people are like, man, like, okay, it's probably time to change up a little bit. But what I can say in terms of, as we're talking about creating, just workplaces, talking about diversity, right? One of the things I can honor my predecessor, who was the CEO before I was the CEO, was that she was very intentional about stepping aside for a person of color to lead. So when you read my bio, you heard that I'm the first person of color, first woman of color, first Black woman, all the things, to lead this organization in 108 years. So there was some leadership that happened on my predecessor's part to say, it's time for that to change, right? And so what can she do in her, she was a white woman, so what could she do in her privilege to make room for me? And so I just wanted to, also say that there needs to be more of that too, of people just recognizing, you can also use your leadership to pull along someone else to be the leader, as your successor too.
That's good.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, that's a blessing. And I've heard Vanessa say that before. I'm like, man, wow, 108 years, and the fact that she's the first, in Madison, that is really that's, to me, that's changing. I like to say changing the game, right? Because I know also that Vanessa's pulling other people alongside her, that who she in different leadership roles and things of that nature. And we do the same. But yeah, so I definitely I take my hat off to Vanessa on a lot of different occasions. So yeah, I appreciate the fact that she stepped up and stepped into that role.
So we've kind of, a couple of the comments remind me of this next question, about what does it take to nurture a diverse team? So Anthony, we're talking about the culture that you're creating and the team that you're leading. And Vanessa, I know a question that actually came out of part one of our conversation referred to an example you've modeled at YWCA, this exercise called the fishbowl. So I'm wondering how that contributes to nurturing a diverse team. And then perhaps Christine, you've got some examples as well. What are some of those daily practices, the things that we always have to keep in front of us, or the systems and the processes, but the nurture that it requires to invest in a diverse team and help them flourish?
I think, and for us, it is really just kind of just challenging, and I like to say it's just busting the bubble, right? And just really, when there are things that that needs to be conversations, we don't allow things to kind of linger around. We make sure that we're not only having the conversations, but also having action plans to work around that, but then also learning how to build up our team, right? Learning how to encourage the openness, but also being able to be respectful of the openness as well with each other, because it's a process. I'm pretty sure things are done differently from year to year, and honestly, month to month in a lot of different occasions. But being able to, I think, respect, it was something that Christine said earlier. Respect, it is the key to a lot of it, and not putting anyone in a situation where they feel as though that they have a fear of being able to be open to everyone, and being even open to everyone, or being open one-on-one in a respectful manner. I think that's, in the midst of all of that, that's how you continue to not only build, but also to recreate the environment that you have.
Jump off that too. In South Africa, the word respect, which I brought up in the other part of this, was said over and over again. And sometimes Zulu people in South Africa, where I lived, would talk about how respect was like the sort of cornerstone of what it meant to be a Zulu person. And so I started paying attention, like, I realized these people think of themselves as like experts in respect. So how do I learn how to respect? And one of the lessons that I personally learned as a foreigner in that place was the language in Zulu, when you greet somebody, you say "Sawubona," which means "I see you." And it was so essential that you would say that before every conversation. If you just walked up to a bank teller and like asked them for your money, they would look at you strange if you didn't first say "Sawubona" and then you ask how you are. And that concept of like, I see you, I think plays out in so many areas of our life. What does it mean to actually see the people in front of you? Not just sort of assuming like, okay, they got their paycheck at the end of the day, they're fine, but like, what needs are happening in their life? How do you really listen and pay attention? The other thing, it's a little unrelated, but I would say too, we need to practice being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And I say this especially to my white brothers and sisters, that we often in these conversations assume that if it gets uncomfortable, then we've gone too far. And to really handle inclusivity and diversity, we have to be willing to go to the uncomfortable places. The people around us are already being uncomfortable, okay, white brothers and sisters, and it's our turn to be uncomfortable. And know your conflict style. Some of us are surrounded by a family structure or a culture where we've been raised to retreat when we're in conflict. Some of us sort of get head on into it, and we need to know how we respond to conflict. And we also need to pay attention to the ways the people around us respond to conflict, and give space for that. So, if the person around you has experienced conflict and they're more comfortable dealing with it through like an email or a mediator, be flexible in how you deal with conflict, and recognize people do that differently. But you have to go through that conflict and that uncomfort to get there.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Christina, about, seeing people. And I was just going to, piggyback on that as the same thing that, we reiterate is, seeing the individual, right? Seeing each other's humanity, that we show up and, just think about this being in this pandemic, being in multiple pandemics at the same time, right? There has been a lot of having to see each other's humanity, see that, that mom who is, struggling to get their child on virtual learning as well as maintain their job as well, seeing their humanity. So a lot of the struggles that my staff have had to deal with during this pandemic has allowed each other to see each other in different spaces of humanity, right? And that's okay. And the part about growth and restoration in our values is really about, there are going to be moments where I am not all together, and that's okay, and being able to accept that with one another. I think one of the things that we have instituted, which I appreciate, is we do a lot of work with restorative justice. And one of the things that I'm adamant as a leader about us walking the talk, right? So if we're going to be doing restorative justice in the community, we need to be doing it internally as well. And so a lot of our meetings are in circle. And the circle process itself is an opportunity that allows people to be on the same level playing, right, field of the power dynamics, right? So where a lot of times we're in schools doing circle process and there's the teacher and student in a circle, but it's no longer teacher and student. We're in a circle, which means all those power dynamics go away and we're talking to each other on a human level. And so we do that as well within our organization. On a lot of our meetings are in circle process. We're doing a lot of check-ins. So like when I start a meeting, when you're talking about seeing someone, I don't jump right into business. I try to be intentional about how are you? Let me check in first to see how you're doing. You know, asking about their personal life, what's going on. And then also, you know, you mentioned the fish bowls. I mean, the fish bowls are really an opportunity for us to, again, see each other and hear each other. So how it works is you have, for instance, we would have a topic. So we would say, okay, maybe we're going to center, let's say Black women in this particular fishbowl. So I would ask, you know, throughout the staff of Black women in the organization who wanted to participate. They would participate, say they want to participate, they would be in the middle of the circle. So it'd be an inner circle. We're having a conversation, because I participated too. We were having a conversation about, one, you know, what does it mean to be a Black woman to us? What does it mean to be a Black woman here in Madison? What does it mean to be a Black woman in this organization? How does it feel? You know, those kinds of things, real conversations. And then the rest of the staff was in a circle on the outside, on the perimeter, listening in and getting really those gems and listening to their coworkers saying how hard it is for them in their identities and their different identities. And I think what it did was it created an environment where it broke down barriers of being afraid to have real conversations with each other. So because I heard something, I was able to, you know, go to my coworker and say, you know, when you said that, you know, that really resonated with me or whatever. So there started to be more one-on-one conversations. And then also what came out of it was a natural move to affinity groups. So because we were establishing these sort of groups that would be in the circle in the middle, they established their own sort of affinity groups and continued. So we now have affinity groups where they meet however they want to meet and talk about topics however they want to talk about. So that's kind of what that did for us with the mission of eliminating racism and empowering women and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. It's a huge lift, right? But we can't have a mission like that and not be internally having these hard conversations. So, yeah.
Good. So follow-up question, is there ever a tension as you're caring? There were a lot of comments about caring for the individual and seeing and the individual level of respect and care that is administered. As a leader, is that ever in tension with, I'm going to throw out kind of a general, the concept of fairness in the workplace or equity and perhaps bringing some definitions would be helpful. But does that make sense? Like, as you're seeing individuals and nurturing a team, is that in tension with where you're going? Does that make sense?
I think if I'm hearing you right, but you're saying, is it basically intentional to making sure that our team understands exactly what we're doing and how we're trying to create this justice and, I mean, the right type of environment for all of us? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like how do you balance caring for individuals and maybe individual differences while upholding a team expectations or a team culture? Does that make sense? So sometimes, and maybe I'm seeing this wrong, so you can feel free to correct me.
No, I think you're saying it right. Right. So hey, I'm laughing honestly because for us, I think it's more of, it's just like family, right? So in your family, there's times that where, you know, you may see things different, want to do things different, whatever the case may be, you may clash, whatever. But at the end of the day, you're still family. At the end of the day, there's times that you still have to work together to accomplish whatever a goal is. At the end of the day, there's a mission, and you know that in order to accomplish it, you have to do it together, right? And I think that you know, as much as we talk about, hey, yeah, these are employees and you have to do this, that, and the other, but and maybe this is just a nonprofit thing. I'm not 100% sure about this, but I often feel that, especially for us, it becomes a family, right? We are a family. We are trying to grow. We expect to make sure that there's going to be times that we're not going to agree. There's going to be times that we may clash. But I think what makes it so powerful and in the growing moments is the fact that we're able to work through those things and to be able to grow together, right? And be able to talk about it. Right. And it may not happen in the same day, right? It may be like, okay, let's readdress that conversation, you know, the next day or so or whatever, but we don't allow those things to linger. I think those, to me, I feel like those are the things that are important. That's especially when your organization is very mission driven. That's how you get the mission done, but then also that's how you're able to grow what you have, and then you learn something in the process. What are the takeaways from that, right? What, you know, how can we learn how to work better together? How can we learn some of the things that you didn't like, some of the things that I didn't like also? But also, you know, how do we how do we continue to make the mission? I mean, to be able to complete the mission. I think I'll say this in before I shut up, right? So I think sometimes as we get into our professions and things of that nature, I think sometimes we make things hard, right? When sometimes you have to be able to pull back and just pull it back to the basics, and being able just to have conversations with people, and again, meeting people where they're at. That has to be the norm at all times, because at the end of the day, that's still a person who you're talking to, regardless if you're the CEO of an agency or not, right? So that's yeah. I mean, that's kind of my approach to things. You know, so was that old saying? You treat the CEO the same way how you treat the guy, the janitor, and that's something I truly believe in.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just mention, you know, I think sometimes in that dynamic, people start on the wrong end. So they're looking for the production piece, like they want people to produce and, you know, arrive at their, you know, best and do their best and job and blah, blah, blah. And so they're pressing so much on that side of sort of the employment skill piece or the job description piece. And, you know, and they miss that if you start with culture first, meaning you start with people feeling like they belong in your organization, people feeling valued, people feeling seen, people will then produce on their own. So you gotta, you know, put the focus in the right area, to make sure that people are feeling like this is a place I want to be, right? Nonprofit, you know, we say all the time, nonprofit, if you're trying to get rich, this is not where you want to work, okay? But if you have this passion, right, about serving your community, you know, serving the most marginalized, you know, all these things that I would say my staff bring to the table, really for me, my focus is making sure that they feel seen, valued, appreciated, feel like they belong, so that there are opportunities then that they feel like, you know, I feel like I can be my best self and arrive and serve in the best way because I have all of this culture, you know, when it comes to when I arrive at work, I want to be here. I come to work excited to come to work. You know, I don't, you know, you want people not to be dragging and like, you know, oh my gosh, I have to go to work. You know, that's the culture I'm trying to create so that people will produce on their own and it not be a forced thing. It will be a natural thing because they're like, we want to do well. We want to see our team win. We want to see, you know, as Anthony was saying, we also refer to ourselves as family. We want to see our family win, you know, including our residents and the people, our participants. We're all family. So that comes with creating the right culture, so that people then rise sort of to the occasion, I would say. And I would say also a part of that, shout out to my board. I think my board president might be on here, but there are it's a whole entire effect, right? So our board is very integral in this too. So like even in the fish bowls, we invited the board members to participate, right? So that they could be integrated in these conversations we're having as a team, as a family. So it's really about the holistic approach to what is your culture
Mm.
in your work environment. What is the work environment? Is it toxic, or
Mm.
is it one that people want to come to and be a part of?
Mm. Really good.
Vanessa, I love that. I was thinking something similar too, that even just that whole question of like, is it fair, is so much from an individual mindset. And in the United States, we are just trained to think as individuals in so many ways that we're not even aware of, until we have to like sort of stop and step back and question, does that even make sense? And like, if we think about creating just workplaces, we can't think about it as just being about one individual, or like, you know, either you make it just for this person or you make it just for this person. Like Lila Watson's quote about like, your liberation has to be tied up in mind, is it's the truth. Like, it's not just aspirational, it's actually just how organizations work, that our liberation is tied up together. And so when we create organizations where somebody else is thriving, that does have knock-on effects for everybody in the group. And I think this is one of the biggest sort of learning milestones that we need in coming in sort of moving toward creating just workplaces, is to be able to recognize, where do we have an individualist mindset where we're assuming that every individual just needs to sort of climb their own way up the ladder on their own. One way that I recommend thinking about this is I ask people, okay, if you think about the story of the Israelites being enslaved in Egypt, pause and ask yourself for a second, why did God not just take Moses out of that situation? You know, it would have been easy, right? Like Moses was already off in the wilderness. He'd already sort of recognized injustice. God could have just said, I'm going to start this nation over with you, get you out of this, leave the slaves. But instead, God said, I will step in. I'm not going to expect Israel to do this on their own, but I'm going to intervene in this situation and create justice for an entire community together. And I'm going to create a new society that is just. And as Christians, as churches, as organizations, I think we really need to have that kind of mindset, that it's about creating entire systems that are just, not just extracting one person and sort of giving them a better life on their own.
That's beautiful. That's so good. And I had written down the question, what do healthy power dynamics look like? And I feel like that's kind of growing out of this observation, where I'm thinking, you know, existing organizations, and how do you lead an organization to center belonging? And I'm visually like, I'm visualizing, you know, the hierarchies kind of dissolving, and the willingness to center or prioritize values that have gotten stuck in just smaller corners, maybe within our organization, or they're stuck just listed on a website. But what would it look like to deconstruct, you know, some of those structures that tend to value process and system above the relationship and the belonging and the seeing and the respect and the communal, as opposed, and the team, the family, as opposed to the individual. Anything else you guys would add on that? Just using that phrase, what do healthy power dynamics look like? And how, I mean, I think we can all imagine how those unhealthy power dynamics erode a just workplace. But I think of, I mean, Vanessa, you, in your bio, I read about just your value for empowerment. And what does that look like as we're centering belonging, but we're leading an organization, we have a mission, we're empowering others. How does that, the power dynamics, if we can use that word, how do those function in a healthy way?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. Actually, my team, when I first started as a CEO, there was a lot of, you know, conversation about what does shared leadership look like, or shared sort of this collaborative leadership model, and, you know, taking away hierarchies and things like that. And I never, you know, I was like, you know, there is some of that, but I had to be very honest with my staff that there are going to be moments where I have to make a decision, right? But you know what was really important for me to do was to build trust amongst my staff that when I made a decision, they trusted they trusted in my leadership, right? So I think there is something to be said about taking time to build relationships enough that you're building trust with one another, you're getting to know one another so that when something does happen or a challenge does come, that there's that trust there already established that we can agree to disagree, or we can, um, you may not understand because maybe there's some confidential stuff that I have to keep confidential, but because you trust my leadership and you trust me as a person, you trust that I got it, right? And so I think there is some room. I always say, like, when I can be collaborative, I'm collaborative. I try to be collaborative as much as I can because I believe in people taking ownership and accountability for decisions, right? So I always say, okay, you were a part of that decision, remember? So I can bring it back, right? But then also it creates sort of a feeling of, again, being seen and being a part of the process. So as much as collaboration can be possible, I do that, right? However, there are times, again, that as a leader, I have to make decisions and I can't be collaborative, maybe, in the sense that I want to be. But I hope that I've built enough trust with my organization and with the people that I serve, with the people I serve with, that trust is there, that even in a decision that they may not have been a part of, they trust my leadership.
Vanessa, thanks for saying that. I was actually kind of like thinking if I wanted to say this too, and was it a risky thing to say? But my first thought too was that I think we sometimes assume that just workplaces are flat hierarchically, that everybody is just at the same level. But typically that doesn't actually work well for an organization, and it feels a little bit like
you'll never
telling
get
people
the
no.
decision made.
Some people yeah, right. But I want to have a supervisor, and I want to have a supervisor who's not afraid to make decisions that affect me. But like you said, Vanessa, I just want that supervisor to see me, to understand what my needs are, to advocate for me when there's time to advocate for me, to listen to me, to take that into account. But at the end of the day, I don't want to have to make every decision. I'm really glad I have supervisors who make decisions. So realizing that there are differences in power, that's okay. There was a great conversation I had with this woman in South Africa that I will never forget, who she hadn't been able to even like go beyond maybe like a 6th grade education. And she was talking about one of her favorite jobs. And she was like, the way I think about it is my boss can do things that I cannot do. And I can do things that my boss cannot do. And we just need to appreciate each other. We need to respect each other. Again, this idea of like, it's okay for people to have different roles, different skills, different power in organizations even, but that we use that responsibly and humbly, wield it with benevolence and humility.
Yeah, I was sitting over here just kind of chuckling to myself, as most of you that know me on this call know that I do laugh quite a bit, but because it is something that what you said, Christine, as far as it's like, hey, you know what, it's okay. That's that person's superpower, right? Whatever the case may be, but also I have to be able to trust in that person's superpower as well, because I've seen it done, and also that's why I brought that person to the table. Right. But then also they trust in me, and they trust that at the end of the day that I'm able to, whether if it's pulling in grants, whatever the case may be, to be able to keep the ball going. Those are that, it goes right back to respect and trust all over again. I think the more and more that we have those conversations, and when things are not clear, it's our responsibility to make sure that they are clear as well. So yeah, very well said, the both of you. I was just, yeah. Again, I'm always laughing, so.
Well, and I think, transparency goes a long way too. As much as you can be transparent about things, I strive to be an authentic leader in all forms that means, right? So that means, I am always trying to figure out how to be transparent as much as I can, right? Obviously, there's some things, HR and some things you may have to be confidential about. However, there may be still a way that I can translate or talk about something and be transparent about a real issue. And I think that also builds that respect and trust from your team, when you're able just to be authentically yourself, but also transparent, you know, not sort of be in a space of hiding, or people feel like you're hiding information, or I found that just be transparent about, you know, what's going on, how I'm feeling. And I've had to grow into that and being a vulnerable leader, because, you know, naturally I just try to get things done and make it happen. And I may not, I felt like it was a learning I had to do, was that I was like, well, I don't want to put that on my staff, right? That, okay, I'm holding this or carrying this. But then I realized, you know, actually it might be helpful in a learning experience, or I don't have to carry it by myself if I actually am vulnerable about how I'm carrying something or what it is that I'm carrying. And so I am, you know, I would say continuously evolving as a leader, to be more vulnerable and transparent.
That's great. I wonder if any of you have, I'm thinking of my own leadership experiences as well, where you may have made a misstep where you either chose, I'm just kind of speaking metaphorically, you chose the circle and you probably should have chose the hierarchical, you know, or you chose the hierarchical process and you really should have chose the circle. And how do we retrace our steps as leaders there when we recognize when we chose the wrong approach? I wonder if any of you have an example that comes to mind about what that requires from us as leaders.
All right. I see all smiles pointing to me right now. So that's all right. So I am one of those people that will, if I feel that I've misstepped in any way, I have no problem with actually going back and really, and I claim it, I own that, right? You know, and what I've learned by doing that, not only has that been a greater process. This is even talking to my CEO from Nehemiah, or whether if I'm talking to some of my other staff that who else I'm working with our team. You know, it is one of those things where, you know, just really just owning it and being honest and being able to just, you know, you probably hear me say it, especially on this call, a million times, is that the fact it goes right back to respect, right? It's going right back to trust, right? It's going right back to being transparent. And the more that you do that, it makes things easier. But then also it allows your team, regardless if it's the CEO or it's, you know, another part of the team, of them coming to you and being honest and really putting things out on the table. That's something that we have a part of our team quite a bit, where we say we like to have table talks, right? And just say, hey, look, so is this a table talk between me and you, or is it a table talk between, we want the whole team to be here to be able to have whatever that deeper conversation may be. And yeah, and it works, right? Yeah, I'm very, very fully transparent. If I feel like I did something wrong, or even if, but also I allow people to let me know if they felt like I did something wrong, right? Or right, you know, and saying, you know, but it's not only, even though we're talking about in the workspace, right? But then also there are community leaders who I talk to. Me and Vanessa, we talk, you know, and just you know, just say, hey, man, bro, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Am I going crazy? Right? You know, it's a blessing to be able to have people who can almost give you a self check, right? You know, it's a couple that's on here that I love them dearly. I don't see them as much, but love them dearly. Deb and Bob, you know, I'll just kind of point them out, you know. And so when me and Bob, sometimes it's just it's not always work, right? It's just kind of just talking, just life, right? You have to have that balance. But if you're not honest with yourself, you know, the only thing you're doing is hindering and hurting yourself long term. And you in a reflection of that, you end up hindering and hurting your team as well. Because then it starts playing out in all aspects of your life, I feel. So yeah.
So good. I know we could probably hear from each of you on that, but we're nearing the top of the hour. So I want to throw out kind of a last opportunity for each of you to speak to. You're each bringing a sense of personal Christian faith to the work that you do. And so I would just love to hear how does your Christian faith fuel your leadership in creating just workplaces? What is that point of connection for you as you bring that authenticity to your leadership, and see that embodied in the practices that you're leading? I think that would be a great way to send us off today.
I'm smiling at the two of them this time.
Jump in. I shared one earlier, I guess, this story of freedom of captives in the Old Testament, of release from slavery, and just this reminder that God doesn't say, go off and get yourself out of slavery, but rather like steps in, that God sees oppression. That's one. The other thing that came to mind too is I was really sort of surprised a few years ago to reread the commandment about Sabbath. And as a kid, I learned it as basically rest on the Sabbath, that you need to just rest on the Sabbath. And I reread it, and the whole passage actually is very much about management too. And it says, not only should you honor God and rest on the Sabbath, but also your animals and your servants. And so it's just one of those many places where we sometimes overlook the ways that Christian faith presses us to be humble sort of leaders, and to wield power graciously, to think about the people around us, not just think about ourselves as individuals, but to look around us and say, like, what systems are we part of, and how do we create justice, Sabbath, and all those things for the people around us as well.
Thank you.
Jump in. Yeah, say Anthony. So, one quick thing I want to add to the last question.
Yeah, go for it.
Just that repair and healing begins when accountability and ownership is taken. So I wanted to put that in their space too.
That's a good word. Thank you.
But as far as my faith, I would say a lot of times I tell people all the time, if you see me walking up towards the building from the parking lot, a lot of times you might see my mouth moving, and it's me praying. I try to pray before I enter the building, just to ask for wisdom for the day, ask for grace for the day, ask for everything that I might need for that day. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is I really believe in purpose. I believe that God puts us in positions for a reason and for an appointed time. And so I'm always trying to make sure that I'm hearing God about where I'm supposed to be. Because if I know that God is leading me to be somewhere, then I know that I can sustain there, right? So no matter what the challenges that come my way, I know that God has me, and that he will give the provision for me to make it through that. And so, like, I'm one of those people that you can't ask the question, where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? Because I say, I have no idea. Wherever God leads, I have no idea. But I do know that it's wherever God leads. And so for me, I try to live my life led by his presence and led by what I feel like God is telling me to do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anthony, you get the last word.
Yeah. But I think, well, honestly, I feel Vanessa kind of hit on the head, but what I would say, I pray just about everything I do. I pray before we got on this meeting. I prayed in the morning, or I pray even when I'm having difficult conversation, right? But I think my prayer life is what has really kept me balanced. But then also, this is something I say quite a bit too. One, there's no such thing as a perfect person, and then so, but with my imperfections, I also make sure that I'm asking God to be able to help me understand them, and being able to have people around me who can help me balance those things out, right? And being able to, and again, be honest with me, right? Those are things that are a must, because anyone can get caught up in their own hype, right? And that, and at the end of the day, that doesn't do nothing but destroy you long term. So that's just kind of what it is. Prayer. You got great people around you, pray with them, or people who you can just talk to. I think those are important, but make sure those are trusted people as well. So just like, those are huge for me. So.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you each so much. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Christine. And thank you, Vanessa, for not just your contributions to today's conversation, but for your leadership in each of your spheres and the way that you're committed to Christ in all that you do. We're so appreciative of your models and your service. So thank you all for joining us.